Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've ever looked at a patient chart and seen that dreaded phrase drug allergy, or maybe wondered why some people get just terrible side effects from a standard dose, well, this deep dive is for you.
It absolutely is.
Today, we are cracking open the essential foundations of nursing pharmacology. Specifically, we're focusing on the toxic effects of drugs.
It's the necessary but, frankly, scary conversation we have to have. While we administer drugs for their therapeutic benefit, every single pharmaceutical is a potent chemical.
Meaning all of them are potentially dangerous.
All of them carry an inherent danger. So our mission today is to cut through those long lists of problems and really synthesize three crucial things: why adverse reactions happen, how to tell a true allergy from a standard side effect, and most critically, the nurse's job in anticipating and intervening before major harm occurs.
Okay, let's unpack this with some crucial definitions right away. We need to distinguish between four core terms. We'll start broad with the adverse drug reaction, or ADR.
Right, an ADR is simply any undesirable effect. They can range from, merely unpleasant to outright dangerous.
Yeah.
But you have to distinguish that general term from a drug allergy.
Which is more specific.
Much more specific. An allergy means the body has actually formed antibodies to the drug, and when it's re-exposed, it triggers a full, visible immune response.
So an allergy is immunological, but then we have this other term, hypersensitivity. How does that fit in?
Hypersensitivity is kind of the catch-all for excessive responsiveness to a drug's effects, either primary or secondary. This exaggerated response isn't always an allergy.
Oh.
Sometimes it's just how that individual patient processes the drug, or it could be due to an underlying pathological problem they have.
And then the final, ultimate escalation of toxicity, poisoning.
That's defined as an overdose. It typically leads to severe damage across multiple body systems, and it carries a really high potential for fatality. We're moving from unpleasant side effects to full systemic catastrophe.
What's fascinating here is that the sources immediately highlight the weight of responsibility on the clinician who spends the most time with the patient.
The nurse.
The nurse. Why is the nursing role so uniquely critical in managing drug safety?
Because the nurse is the most frequent drug administrator, they are the patient's primary safeguard. The source material outlines essential steps that have to happen before a drug is even given. It starts with establishing a baseline assessment, reviewing every single contraindication and caution, and then, perhaps most importantly, patient education.
I think a lot of people assume we have to read the entire 10-page insert.
Right.
But the source clarifies that we only need to teach them the most common anticipated adverse effects and, crucially, the appropriate comfort measures for those effects. That vigilance dramatically improves compliance.
Exactly. Now let's categorize the actual adverse effects, which break down into three logical groups. The first is an extension of the primary action.
This is the simplest category, right? It's
Yep.
often purely dose-related. It means the drug is doing precisely what we want it to do, but just a little too much of it.
Precisely. If we give an anticoagulant to prevent clotting and the patient starts experiencing excessive spontaneous bleeding, that's just the desired effect magnified.
So the intervention is clinical.
It's careful monitoring and adjusting the dosage. This isn't some surprise reaction, it's an overresponse.
Okay, so if the first type is too much of a good thing, how do we categorize the effects that are totally unrelated to the drug's goal? That must be the secondary actions.
It is. These are effects produced in addition to the desired action. The dose is correct, but the chemical structure itself interacts with other systems. Think of antihistamines.
Sure.
They dry up your sinuses, which is great,
Mhm.
but they also cause drowsiness. The drying is primary, the drowsiness is a secondary, often undesired effect.
That distinction is key for patient counseling. You tell them about the drowsiness so they don't operate machinery. What about the classic GI distress from antibiotics?
That's another perfect example of a secondary action: nausea, vomiting, diarrhea.
Yeah.
The drug is focused on killing bacteria,
Right.
but it also irritates the digestive lining.
And the intervention is just supportive.
Right. Advise small, frequent meals to minimize that irritation.
And the third major category is hypersensitivity, the one that tells us something unique is going on with that individual patient.
Often that uniqueness stems from underlying pathology.
Hmm.
So if a patient has poor kidney function and we give them a drug that is normally excreted entirely through the kidneys,
The drug just builds up.
it accumulates. Even a standard dose quickly becomes toxic because they can't clear it.
Or it can be a really bizarre individual response. I love this anecdote from the source material. Older adults reacting to narcotics not with the expected sedation, but with stimulation and hyperactivity. It just flips the script entirely.
It speaks to changing receptors and cellular response over a lifetime. We also see secondary effects become dangerous because of pre-existing conditions.
Oh, so.
Well, if an anticholinergic drug, which blocks certain nerve impulses, causes urinary retention, that's uncomfortable for anyone. But if the patient already has an enlarged prostate, that effect can quickly cause bladder paralysis and serious injury.
This detailed assessment of individual patients is why we have to be so strict about separating a common adverse effect from a true drug allergy.
That differentiation is non-negotiable. It has to happen because an allergy involves the immune system and can escalate very, very quickly. The crucial point here, a patient cannot be allergic to a drug they have never taken.
Though cross allergies within a drug class are common.
They are. The source gives the perfect aha moment example. A patient claims they are allergic to furosemide or Lasix.
And when you ask why, they say because it makes me urinate constantly.
And that is the desired therapeutic effect. The nurse needs to delve deeper. Did they get a rash? Did their throat swell? Simply experiencing the drug's mechanism of action is not an allergy.
To properly assess a true immune response, the material breaks down 4 distinct types of allergies a nurse has to be aware of. We have the immediate, life-threatening anaphylactic reaction.
Yes, that's system 1. But it's crucial to know the timing of the others. System 3 is serum sickness, which is highly delayed, often occurring like 7 to 10 days after exposure.
And why does that timing matter so much?
Because if a patient calls you a week after leaving the hospital, reporting a high fever, painful joints, and swelling, you need to connect that back to the drug they took a week ago, not necessarily the food they ate yesterday.
And the other 2 are cytotoxic and delayed reactions.
That's right. That difference in timing is a critical piece of the puzzle.
So let's move past immune responses and look at the physical damage a drug can inflict on rapidly turning over cells and vital organs.
These toxic effects are the very reason so many drugs carry major contraindications. Let's start with areas of high cell proliferation.
Like the bone marrow. When drugs, say antineoplastics or strong antibiotics, cause cell death, the rapidly turning over bone marrow cells are highly susceptible. This leads to blood discretion.
Or bone marrow suppression. You assess for it by looking for fever, chills, sore throat, all signs of infection due to leukopenia, and weakness from anemia. But the primary nursing intervention really relies on the lab work.
Right.
You must constantly monitor the white count, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and platelets. The intervention isn't treating the symptoms, it's providing protection rest and injury prevention.
And right alongside blood dyscrasia is stomatitis, the inflammation of the mucous membranes commonly seen with chemotherapy.
Again, rapid cell turnover is the mechanism. We look for swollen gums, gingivitis, and a swollen red tongue, which is glossitis. It makes swallowing difficult.
So the intervention is focused on hygiene.
Exactly. Frequent mouth care with non-irritating solutions and managing nutrition with small, frequent meals.
And while we're on the topic of GI effects, let's discuss superinfections. This is where antibiotics destroy the normal protective flora, allowing other organisms to just grow out of control, like a fungal infection.
Assessment requires vigilance, fever, diarrhea, and local symptoms, like a black or hairy tongue or vaginal discharge and itching. The intervention is supportive care and often initiating antifungal therapy.
Let's pivot to the deep organ damage, starting with the liver. Since oral drugs pass directly to the liver via the first pass effect, liver injury or toxicity is pretty common.
This is where we have to emphasize the priority of lab values. While physical symptoms like fever, malaise, nausea, vomiting, and jaundice are important,
The labs are the first warning.
the primary warning signal for a nurse is elevated liver enzymes, specifically AST and ALT. They signal liver cell destruction before the patient necessarily turns yellow.
And the second vital organ is the kidney. Renal injury occurs because drug molecules can physically plug the small capillaries of the glomerulus, or they can directly irritate the renal tubules.
The potent antibiotic gentamicin is the classic example frequently associated with this. And just like the liver, the most critical assessment cues are the labs. Elevated BUN and creatinine.
Physical signs fatigue, edema will follow.
They'll follow. And in severe cases, we are looking at dialysis for survival.
Speaking of severe systemic damage, we acknowledge that poisoning is the ultimate form of overdose-related toxicity, often requiring life support. But even outside of a massive overdose, drugs can cause these highly specific systemic shifts, particularly with metabolism.
Yes, let's talk about glucose metabolism alterations.
Yeah.
We see two extremes. On one hand, anti-diabetic drugs like glipizide can cause hypoglycemia, low blood glucose.
And the assessment cues for that are confusion, cold and clammy skin, and shaking.
Right. The intervention is immediate glucose restoration, oral if possible, IV if necessary, and safety measures to prevent falls during that confusion.
Then on the other hand, you have agents like ephedrine that can stimulate the breakdown of stored glycogen, causing hyperglycemia.
High glucose. We assess for excessive urination, which is polyuria, thirst, or polydipsia, and that telltale fruity odor on the breath, often with deep, rapid Kussmaul respirations. Intervention here means administering insulin and providing supportive care.
Let's move to electrolyte imbalances, focusing on potassium, which is so critical for cardiac function. What causes low potassium or hypokalemia?
Usually drugs that promote potassium loss, like loop diuretics. We're looking for levels below 3.5, weakness, decreased bowel sounds, and an irregular or weak pulse. Intervention is replacement and continuous cardiac monitoring.
And what about the opposite, hyperkalemia? Where does that surge come from?
This is where we link back to our earlier discussion on toxicity. Hyperkalemia, so K plus greater than 5, can be caused by potassium-sparing diuretics, but also by massive cell death.
From what?
For example, from antineoplastics. It releases high concentrations of intracellular potassium right into the bloodstream. Assessment reveals a slow heart rate and low blood pressure.
And the intervention is urgent.
It's extremely urgent. Measures to decrease potassium, like administering agents such as sodium polystyrene sulfonate or Kayexalate, and absolute continuous cardiac monitoring. The risk of lethal arrhythmias is just too high.
Before we wrap up the list of damages, we have to touch on sensory and neurological effects. For ocular damage, certain drugs can deposit themselves in the tiny arteries of the retina.
Chloroquine is a big one. It can lead to potential blindness. And for auditory damage, think of irritation to the 8th cranial nerve. Common culprits are macrolide antibiotics like streptomycin and even daily aspirin use, which can cause that recognizable ringing in the ears tinnitus.
Finally, we have the neurological syndromes. Beyond just general CNS effects like anxiety or nightmares from beta blockers, we see these specific toxic syndromes.
Right, like atropine-like effects, which block the parasympathetic nervous system. It results in that dry as a bone, red as a beet, mad as a hatter cluster of symptoms, dry mouth, constipation, blurred vision.
And then the rare but really profoundly serious syndromes.
There's the Parkinson-like syndrome, caused by affecting dopamine levels, leading to tremors and rigidity, and the extreme, potentially fatal reaction, Neuroleptic Malignant Syndrome, or NMS. That's characterized by an incredibly high fever, severe muscle rigidity, and wildly unstable vital signs.
And we must conclude with teratogenicity, the danger of drugs causing death or congenital defects, skeletal, CNS, or cardiac, in a developing fetus.
The message here is just stringent caution. For pregnant women, the benefit of the drug must absolutely outweigh the potential risk, and they must be advised against any self-medication.
So, what does this deep dive all distill down to? We've covered a vast spectrum, from primary extensions and secondary annoyances to 4 types of immune-mediated reactions, severe organ and tissue damage, and these acute metabolic and neurological shifts.
The essential knowledge, the critical takeaway for you, is that safe practice requires continuous assessment. It's not just checking the box when the drug is administered. You have to have the ability to differentiate the spectrum of danger.
And that leads directly to our final provocative thought for you to consider, based on a real-world scenario. You have a 64-year-old patient named Tua Shang with a history of severe emphysema, and he's receiving amoxicillin for an ear infection.
Oh.
He develops difficulty breathing, wheezing, and is clearly in distress. As the nurse, how do you differentiate a severe allergic response like anaphylaxis to the amoxicillin, which affects breathing, from an acute worsening exacerbation of his underlying emphysema?
It requires integrating everything we discussed today, timing, previous exposure, all the systemic symptoms, to truly connect the dots.
Absolutely. Use this deep dive as your foundation for safe practice and continuous learning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.